Today we're going to talk about tenouchi. Te no uchi means literally hands of striking, and it's used to describe how we hold the sword. Tenouchi is quite important because it allows us both to drive the force from our body as we move through the weapon, but it also allows us to efficiently retain control of the weapon. So, in Kyoho, we basically only use one method of tenouchi, and it is quite simple. You place the butt cheeks of the heel of your palm on the rear spine of the tsuka. Throw your thumb over, grip firmly with the bottom two fingers. Touch with the middle finger, the thumb and forefinger float. You'll notice that as I hold the sword level with the ground, it is oblique. I will always have this sort of oblique orientation with the sword itself. This lets me maximize my power by keeping my hand in almost the same mechanical position that it is in its resting state. It's quite important. The hand stays below the fuchi and the tsuba. Now, Kyoho is predominantly a single-handed style. While we do use both hands in the majority of our kata, they're there as an example, but we'll get into that later. As for the second hand, in Kyoho, when we do use it, it is mirrored to the first. Butt cheeks, tight. Touching, floating. We are resting the heel of our palm against the spine at or just above the kashira. The kashira is the metal end cap of the tsuka, the handle. Some common errors in tenouchi that we encounter fairly often are gripping the sword too firmly with sort of even pressure throughout the hand, quite vigorous pressure. The problem with this is that the tension in the palm and in the fingers themselves spreads to the wrist, the forearm, elbow, and up into the shoulder. This greatly retards the amount of energy that I am able to transfer from my body's motion into the swing. It basically isolates the swing so that it becomes an elbow-shoulder motion only. It also inhibits the amount of range. In other words, to swing it comfortably, it's significantly shorter, 6 to 8 inches on the conservative side. Now, if I choose to perhaps grip in this fashion but relax the wrist and work to stretch, as I would in a cut, I end up with this kind of position, where my wrist is basically at its furthest mechanical axis point here. It's mechanically a very weak position. I'm not able to apply a great deal of force into the target. If I encounter a hard target, I'll end up taking a lot of trauma to the wrist. And even just swinging the sword, such as in subri, rhythmic swinging practice, I can cause tendon and joint issues in my wrist. So it's to be avoided. The hallmark of this position, of course, is that perpendicular line opposing the central axis of the tsuka. Now, a very similar problem that occurs is when people will choke up and rest their hand at or basically on the tsuba, the sword guard. This has the exact same effect. It forces the hand into a mechanically weak position regardless of the tension in the arm, but it has the additional downfall that the skin on the top of your hand is being abraded off by the underside of the tsuba and some of the metal fittings, such as the fuchi, the collar that comes around. Also, this, as it wears your skin away. The oils and acid from your skin wear the patination away from the metal. Now the patina, the oxidation that occurs there naturally, is, well, not naturally, it's mechanically induced, is there to protect the metal from erosion and oxidation. So we really don't want to start taking that off, because it's going to greatly decrease the overall life of the fittings in the sword, especially in antiques where the material might be a softer iron or even copper alloys, for instance. Now, the third problem that is fairly common is they'll get the sword gripped right, but they'll have it so that the center of the heel of their palm rests along the center of the spine. This is quite common. You'll almost always see where, as opposed to here, in the good position, where it lines up with the strength of the elbow, in the poor position, you're always going to have their arm sort of slightly canted off. Now, this is problematic, both because it does minorly impact the amount of force that you can generate, not in terms of sort of a free cut against a non-defending target, but rather if you happen to be in a position where you're contesting the cut. In other words, your opponent is cutting at you, you're cutting at them in sort of the same timing, and you're working to drive their cut off the line and cut into them. If you have this sort of off the line hand position, it's very difficult to apply force in the direction, the exact vector that you want. Another really important problem with this hand position is when you're in a fight and your opponent is, they're bullying you, they're contesting your position, and they're trying to suppress your weapon at all, they will often strike the mune, the spine of your sword, in an attempt to drive it away, to clear a path to be able to strike you sort of freely. Now, with this, because we have a 2.5 to 3 foot long metal lever that we're holding out here, the force comes to our fulcrum and then begins to work on the load. The load here is the control point of the thumb. The problem is, in this orientation, the thumb can be actuated open, right? So a good, firm, suppressing strike will pop the sword clean out of your hand. It's not only embarrassing, it's sort of, pretty detrimental. So we always want to make sure, right, the triangle bone is over the rear of the skull. So we can apply force through the edge, into the target, and so that when force is applied, right, that force transmits into our skeleton, into the natural body support and foundation that can absorb that force. Does this make sense? It's pretty simple, pretty easy. Gripping in other schools. Some Koryu old schools, which were formed prior to the abolishment of the samurai caste in the Meiji era, they have many methods of holding the sword. For us in Hyoho, we don't really bother with that, but we're going to talk about some just so you can understand other people's thoughts and approaches to it. So, a common one that I've seen is that palm heel centered, but what they will do is center the knuckle, the knuckle of the index finger, over the center of the spine. What this does is it fixes that problem of the support of the sword. Using this method, you can apply force through the sword just as you would in ours, and you don't have the same risk of being disarmed because your wrist itself centers over the spine, and it's fairly reinforced. Again, in Hyoho, we don't use this method at all, but there are plenty of fine old schools that do. One of the methods of holding that I get asked about fairly frequently is called gyaku-te uchi. Gyaku is reverse, te, hand, uchi of striking, right? So gyaku-te uchi is what we in the West tend to call an ice pick grip, right? Edge is down, point is down in relation to the orientation of your thumb. Now in Hyoho, we do not have any gyaku-te uchi type work in any of our sword kata. We do have gyaku-te uchi work in our bow kata. Whether that's analogous to sword work or not, I'll let you guys form your own opinions as the series progresses. It's worth noting that in the bow kata, when we're using gyaku-te uchi, the hand pressure is the same. Butt cheeks, thumb, firm, touching, floating. Hold. Like this. Right. Now, I am not very familiar with other styles that use gyaku-te uchi in sort of open fencing, once the swords are drawn out. But it does show up quite a bit in iai and bato, right? Drawing the sword and striking immediately from that position. It is also featured in some schools, noto, where they return the sword to the side, to the scabbard. Personally, I don't really use gyaku-te uchi for anything outside of tanto work, dagger work. But that's my experiences and sort of how I play the game. As always, if you're studying a traditional school, just ask your sensei, right? Do what they tell you, but don't be afraid to press them for a little bit of explanation, right? If, like so many other people, you don't have access to Coquille at this point in your life, but you're still very excited in training, play with it, right? Use trial and error. Find out how is it strong, how is it weak, what are its tactical benefits, are there any, right? And just because something might work for me, it doesn't mean it'll work for you, because we'll have different body types, different sort of backgrounds, different psychology, right? So find what works for you, play with it, test it, you know, and kind of have the feeling that assume it's going to fail and let that be your baseline. Then, if you can repeatably prove, oh, okay, this works again and again and again against somebody who doesn't really want it to work, then you can be a little bit more assured in its use. Right? Good. As an additional note about the rear hand, some styles, rather than gripping on the tsuka itself, will grip lower with the kashira in their palm. Now, I've heard a couple of reasonings for this. One is that it allows for sort of a more dexterous playing of the sword. I don't necessarily find this to be the case. To me, it just it defeats the purpose of having that second hand, which is, in Hyoho at least, a strong supporting force that lets you really centralize your full body's motion into your strikes or controlling movements of the opponent. So this is just, it's really not something that we do or that I do personally. The other explanation that I've heard is that in doing so, in gripping with the pinky on the kashira or sort of just below it as a reference point, is that it places the kashira firmly in the palm, as you would in some tanto work, so that when you thrust, the energy from the thrust moves straight to your bones and is supported and is therefore a very good thing. I would suggest to you, find a semi-soft target, perhaps a punching bag, or, you know, if you're brave, a tree, and take your bouquet, hold this position, and use this bottom hand, and apply some thrust work to it, and make your own observations. For me, I find this to be incredibly painful, and so I really don't use it. but your mileage may vary. As for the grip, when using the short sword, it is fundamentally the same, right? Butt cheeks on the bench, thumb over top. Firm, touching, floating. One finger width from the edge. A lot of short swords, wakizashi, kodachi, tanto, they won't have a tsuba, a cross guard, but the same rules apply for the same reasons, right? Nice diagonal line and compared to the center mass of the itsuka. Though cutting is different with both the short sword and the tanto, the tenouchi is the same. So here, we have a tanto, same thing. The grip here, in order to accomplish that coming below, I'll oftentimes rest the tanto inside the palm, right? Just as we discussed with the other methods of holding the longsword, this helps to stabilize the force. As to why this is different than the longsword method, really I don't know, right? But for me, this is quite comfortable even when striking very resilient targets, 3/4 inch plywood, so on. Whereas with the sword, it is not so much. And again, with the tanto, this is the one time that I do use gyaku-te uchi. This is not part of hyoho, but it's something that I've picked up from other work. As a point of importance, anytime that I'm using the tanto, I will try and put my thumb on the back. Just as the guard on the sword is there mostly to protect you from your sword rather than you from their sword, the same can be true on tanto. But since most tanto don't have a guard, the thumb is employed, or the palm of the hand is employed to, if you encounter extreme resistance, your hand doesn't slide down onto the blade. So there you have it, how to hold the sword, tenouchi. Okay? If you guys have any questions, go ahead and drop me a message, maybe leave them down in the comments. I'll try and get to them as best as I can. Mostly I'm making these videos for my students. I don't know how involved it will be as other people start to see them, but I will do my best to try and answer any questions you may have. As always, pick up the sword, go train.